After Part 1 of this investigation was published, we received 43 submissions during the first 2 weeks. We expected stories about voice mimicry, names called from the tree line, voices coming from the wrong direction, sounds that were almost correct but not quite. Those accounts arrived. We will cover them, but 3 of the 43 submissions described something we had not examined in Part 1. Something that changes the framework we have been using to understand this phenomenon. 2 of those 3 accounts came from people who had never met. They did not know each other. They lived in the same general corridor of the Pacific Northwest. Both reported being mimicked. That alone was not unusual. What was unusual was the voice they heard. Each person heard the other person's voice. Before we examine the new accounts, we need to briefly review what Part 1 established. These reports make far more sense with that context. If you have not seen Part 1, it is linked below. We recommend watching it first. Part 1 established 3 recurring patterns. First, reports of voice mimicry in wilderness settings are not rare. They appear across decades of documented encounters, across different regions, across multiple cultural traditions that describe similar behavior and similar responses. Second, witnesses consistently describe the voice as sounding correct but somehow incomplete. The voice resembles someone they know, a family member, a hiking partner, a friend. Yet something feels wrong. The cadence is slightly off. The wording feels unusual. Many witnesses compare it to hearing a recording rather than hearing the actual person. Third, several indigenous traditions describe this behavior and recommend the same response. Do not answer. Do not call back. Do not follow the voice. These are presented not as superstitions, but as practical behavioral guidance developed through generations of observation. Tonight, we add a 4th pattern, and it changes the question entirely. Up to this point, the working assumption has been fairly simple. Something hears a voice. Something copies that voice. Then it uses the copy to provoke a response. That model assumes the mimicry happens immediately. Nearby. A local interaction between witness and whatever is producing the sound. The new reports suggest something more complicated. If 2 people in the same geographic corridor hear each other's voices weeks apart, then at least one of 2 possibilities must be true. The first possibility is that the same entity encountered both people. It retained the first voice long enough to use it later, then recognize the connection between the 2 individuals. The second possibility is even more unusual. Multiple entities may be sharing acquired voices across a larger territory, almost like a distributed collection. Neither possibility is simple. Both suggest memory, range, planning, perhaps even cooperation. All of them extend beyond the framework established in Part 1. We are not going to tell you which explanation is correct. We do not know. Our purpose is simply to present the accounts as they were submitted. You can decide for yourself. The first account came from a man we will call Daniel. He hikes the same trail system in the Cascade Mountains of Washington several times each year. He has followed those routes for more than a decade. He knows the terrain through repeated experience rather than occasional visits. He submitted his account 3 days after Part 1 was released. He admitted he had almost decided not to send it. Late in September, he was hiking alone on a moderate backcountry trail. Visitor traffic had already begun dropping for the season. He was approximately 6 miles from the trailhead when he heard his wife's voice. She was not with him. She had remained at home. He knew that with complete certainty. The voice came from dense timber roughly 40 feet west of the trail. It spoke only his name, exactly the way she would call to him from another room inside their house. He stopped walking. He did not answer. Later he admitted he could not fully explain why. He simply knew responding felt wrong. He stood there for about 2 minutes. The voice never repeated. Eventually he continued hiking out. When Daniel returned home, he told his wife what had happened. She listened quietly. Then she told him something she had never mentioned before. 3 weeks earlier, she had hiked a different section of the same trail system with a friend. While walking there, she had heard Daniel's voice coming from the trees. She had not answered either. We want to be precise about the geography. The 2 encounters occurred in the same watershed. The trail sections are not adjacent, but they are connected by a continuous ridge system that an experienced traveler could cross without following established trails. The 2 locations are approximately 14 miles apart in a straight line. Both encounters happened during the same year. Both occurred during the shoulder season. Both took place within the same general corridor. Daniel heard his wife's voice. 3 weeks earlier, his wife had heard Daniel's voice. Daniel submitted his account without knowing that his wife had also contacted us. She used a different email address, a different subject line. We discovered the connection only after comparing the location descriptions. Neither of them knew the other had submitted an account. That brings us to another report that changed the way we began thinking about these encounters. This account came from a woman we will call Raina. She was backpacking in the southern Appalachian mountains during October. She was hiking with a longtime partner on a trail they both knew well. On the second evening, they stopped at a backcountry shelter. Her partner walked to a nearby creek to collect water. Raina remained at the shelter organizing equipment. Then she heard her partner call her name. The voice came from the direction of the creek. Everything sounded correct. The cadence, the familiar shortening of her name, even the slight upward inflection at the end. Raina immediately called back. She asked what was wrong. There was no answer. She called a second time. Approximately 4 minutes later, her partner returned from the creek carrying water. She looked confused. She asked Raina why she had been calling her name. Raina explained that she had only responded after hearing her partner call first. Her partner shook her head. While standing at the creek, she had heard Raina's voice calling her name from somewhere behind her. She had turned around. She had answered. She never heard Raina respond. Both hikers experienced the same pattern. Each heard the other person's voice. Each believed the other had called first. Neither heard the other's reply. Something appeared to occupy the space between them, using both voices at nearly the same time. That detail makes this account especially difficult to fit into the original framework. Daniel and his wife experienced the mimicry weeks apart. Raina and her partner experienced it simultaneously. If their account is accurate, then both voices were being used at the same time, in the same location, against 2 people standing well within normal shouting distance of one another. That possibility raises difficult questions. Perhaps multiple entities were operating together. Perhaps a single source was somehow producing more than one acquired voice at once. We are not presenting either explanation as fact. We are simply presenting the account exactly as it was reported. At this point, one obvious question remains. Could these experiences simply be explained by the way sound behaves in the wilderness? Part 1 addressed that possibility. Dense forests, canyons, ridges, all of them can distort sound. Voices sometimes seem to come from unexpected directions. A hiking partner's voice may appear farther away than it actually is. That explanation probably accounts for some reports. It does not adequately explain the accounts you have heard tonight. Daniel's wife was not present anywhere on that trail. No acoustic effect can carry the voice of someone who is miles away and not speaking. In Raina's case, both hikers would have had to misidentify familiar voices at exactly the same time. Both would have needed to believe the other person had called first. And both would have needed to misjudge the direction of those voices in opposite directions. That explanation quickly becomes difficult to sustain. There is another detail acoustics cannot explain: the behavior itself. These voices are not random. They use names. They reproduce familiar speech patterns. They imitate people the listener knows well. Ordinary sound does not choose which voice will produce the strongest emotional response. These accounts suggest something that does. That raises another important question. Does the mimicry improve over time? Does a single encounter produce only a rough imitation? Or does repeated exposure allow the voice to become more convincing? Several of the submissions we received point in that direction. The first came from a seasonal employee at a remote facility in the Great Basin. He requested complete anonymity. He'd worked at the same location for 4 consecutive seasons. What he described was not a single event. It was a progression. During his first season, he occasionally heard what sounded like his supervisor's voice near the edge of the facility. The resemblance was obvious. But so were the differences. The cadence felt wrong. The rhythm was unnatural. He recognized immediately that something was not right. He investigated. He found nothing. During his second season, the voice changed. He described it as noticeably closer. The cadence had improved. The distinctive qualities that made it sound like his supervisor were more accurate than before. He still knew it was not really his supervisor, but reaching that conclusion required more effort. By his third season, he stopped investigating entirely. He told us he no longer trusted his own judgment enough to respond. He has continued that practice ever since. The second account came from a family that has owned a hunting cabin in the Ozark National Forest for 3 generations. The current owner, a woman we will call June, shared a tradition that began with her grandfather. For decades, he gave the family one simple instruction: never answer a familiar voice coming from the timber beyond the property. He believed the voice became more convincing the longer a family continued visiting the cabin. According to him, responding only helped it learn. June admitted she considered the warning nothing more than old family superstition. Until last autumn. On the second day of a visit, her son suddenly answered what he believed was her voice calling from the edge of the woods. She had never left the cabin. When she asked what he had heard, he described her voice as perfect. Not almost correct. Not close. Indistinguishable. Her grandfather had owned that property for approximately 40 years. That brings us to something we felt was important to investigate directly. What do long-standing indigenous traditions say about this behavior? We contacted a tribal cultural liaison whose community's traditional territory includes part of the same Pacific Northwest corridor where 2 of tonight's accounts originated. She agreed to speak with us on background. She declined to be identified by name or tribal affiliation. We have honored that request. After reviewing the accounts, she told us the reported behavior closely matched a specific category of encounter preserved within her community's oral tradition. She chose not to identify the entity by name. She explained that doing so outside the proper cultural context would not be appropriate. She did agree to share 3 observations publicly. First, the behavior is intentional. The voice is not accidental. It is a tool. Second, the proper response has remained consistent for generations. Do not answer a voice whose source you cannot see. Do not follow a voice into the trees. Do not respond when that voice uses your name. Third, she said the reports from the Pacific Northwest did not surprise her. According to her community's traditions, certain geographic corridors have long histories of this type of encounter. When we asked whether she believed every account involved the same entity, she paused before answering. Then she said perhaps that was the wrong question. The more important question, she suggested, was whether the behavior remained consistent. In her view, it did. Part 1 of this investigation asked a simple question. What is making these sounds? The accounts we received afterward suggest that may not be the right question. They do not tell us what the source is. They tell us something about what it does. It collects voices. It remembers them. It uses them in ways that appear deliberate. The voices are familiar, personal, chosen because the person hearing them is likely to respond. Several accounts suggest the imitation becomes more convincing over time. Some even suggest it can retain voices for weeks, or perhaps much longer. If that is true, then this is not an animal repeating sounds it has heard. It is behavior that appears purposeful. It suggests an understanding of what familiar voices mean to the people hearing them. A stranger calling your name may make you curious. Someone you love calling your name from the trees is much harder to ignore. That difference matters. The cultural liaison we spoke with did not present her community's guidance as superstition. She presented it as practical behavior. Do not answer. Do not call back. Do not follow the voice. Protocols like these usually develop over long periods of repeated experience. At some point in the past, people responded. Whatever happened afterward was significant enough that future generations were taught not to repeat the mistake. We do not know what those experiences were. The tradition does not explain them. It simply preserves the response. If you have not watched Part 1 of this investigation, it is linked below. We recommend starting there before reading the comments. Many of the patterns discussed tonight begin in that first investigation. Others only became visible after viewers started sharing their own experiences. That is why we continue making these videos. Sometimes the pattern only appears after enough people compare what they have seen. We publish new investigations every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. If you would like to follow this series as it develops, consider subscribing before Part 3 is released. The question that continues bothering us is no longer what these voices are. It is how many voices have already been collected. If these reports describe a real pattern, then somewhere in these wilderness corridors there may already be a library of familiar voices. Not random sounds. Not echoes. Voices belonging to real people. The final question is not what happens when you hear one. The final question is how long it has been listening before it decides to use yours.